Good afternoon, YouTube. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the idea that every muscle should have its own big three. Before we get into that topic, if you would like to work with me with coaching, there's a link in the description below to get in contact with me, and I'll be getting back to you within 24 to 48 hours. But let's get into the actual topic. So, should every muscle group have its own big three exercises? My answer is going to be yes, especially if your goal is hypertrophy. Now, regardless of your goal, whether it's strength, whether it's size, which I would hope is the reason why you're coming to this channel, because if you have a goal of, let's say, fat loss or just general health and fitness, what you don't really need to hunker down into what you should not do and just try to optimize everything. Just exercise, count your calories, count your macros, try to live healthier habits and all that kind of stuff, right? But if you're picking up the barbell with a specific goal in mind, size or strength, you should have at least one more movement to assist, supplement, and improve the other movement that you have in your program. Now, let's say your goal is hypertrophy. You are trying to hit a specific muscle. You're trying to grow a specific muscle. You need to understand that a single compound movement is not enough for maximum growth. It never will be. Trying to think to yourself that I can get all of my potential out of one exercise is incredibly lazy. And I think part of the reason why people like to think that way is because they're lazy and they're scared. They don't want to try something new. They don't want to break out and try something that goes against what they already hold to be true, because for whatever reason, it's hard to learn something new and not be emotionally attached and beat yourself up for thinking that you're wrong. You're not wrong for learning something new. You're just getting smarter. It's more wrong to stay ignorant than it is to actually find out the places where your current level of knowledge and understanding is lacking. So, the best exercise for muscle growth is a multitude of exercises. Like I said, one exercise is not enough. Also, another thing I want to get across to you is that if you want to grow a muscle, the muscle just can't be involved. It has to be committed to that movement. What do I mean by this? So let's look at your breakfast plate, right? Your standard American breakfast plate. You've got your eggs, you got your bacon, maybe you got your oatmeal, you got your rice if you are, a person of of widescreen vision such as myself. And what you'll notice is that the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. If you think to yourself that, oh, I'm getting all of my tricep work from my bench, I'm getting all of my tricep work from my overhead press, I'm getting all of my lower back work from my deadlift, I'm getting all of my upper back work from my deadlift even, you are not maximizing the growth of that muscle, because just because those muscles are involved, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are committing enough targeted volume to the muscle you actually want to grow. Be honest with yourself. If you have a muscle that you want to get bigger, you have to do direct work. Certain areas of a muscle can also be biased, but simply by changing the position of the muscle, how you move, depending on how you use an implement and everything like that. So a couple things that you want to do when it comes to picking your exercises is to look at the function of the muscle, the ranges of motion that it can go through. Think about how changing the angles affects things, the angles of your own limbs in relation to the movement. And think about how all those things will change how you stimulate the muscle. So, for example, let's look at something like the biceps, right? We have a bunch of different ways to extend the range of motion in a bicep by bringing the arms behind us. But there's also benefit to doing things like shortening the range of motion. One of the ways that the silver era bodybuilders, the great big natural bodybuilders of the 50s, something that they did was a seated barbell curl. Now, if you are familiar with barbells and you are familiar with sitting, you'll know that if you're seated, the barbell and you being seated aren't going to go very well. What's going to happen is that you will find that the movement is naturally cut off by the moment the bar touches your legs. That's not necessarily a bad thing. While we do want to have a larger range of motion in most cases, range of motion is also going to be dependent on the exercise. By doing a seated barbell curl, you're able to load a specific range of motion of the barbell curl with more weight, more load, and that itself could be stimulatory for size. Whether or not that's something you want to put in your program is entirely up to you, but it's an option. So, and then of course, things like incline benches, stiff leg deadlift, simple ways in which we move our body around certain exercises and modify our form changes the way that we build and strengthen the muscles involved. So, something that I also want to touch upon is what makes a movement good for hypertrophy. For me, it really comes down to 3 basic criteria. First and foremost is how much can you improve or progress on that lift. I think that it's great that more biomechanic information is coming out so that we can get more out of the movements that we do. But this information that is incredibly useful must, in my opinion, should be seen as a servant of something more important, which is, can you improve? Can you progress on that lift? Can you get stronger on that movement? I don't think that just get stronger is good advice for hypertrophy, but if you're not getting stronger, I know damn well hypertrophy is not necessarily occurring. So next, how much does the exercise stimulate the target muscle? So that breakfast analogy, like I mentioned, is the muscle actually involved? Is the muscle the limiting factor? Are you taking that target muscle to failure? That's the next thing you want to take into consideration. And third, honestly, this could be the most important one. Do you like the movement? I think that we get so caught up in trying to find what's optimal and find what's best is that we forget that we can actually enjoy our training a bit. And oftentimes the people who actually enjoy their training the most and will put forward their best effort into things that they enjoy, if they don't put those things in and they just end up disliking their training, they're not going to be getting that great of a result. So you should actually like the training that you are doing. Do you need to like everything in the program? Not necessarily. I mean, there are some things that I personally don't like to do, but I know that they are so useful to my goals that I'm going to do them anyway, as if I love them. So do you like the movement? That's a very good way to determine whether or not something is going to be good for hypertrophy, because you will commit yourself to it, you'll put a lot of effort into it, you will progress on it, and then as a result, you will get bigger. So ideas such as raw stimulus magnitude, stimulus to fatigue ratio, maximum adaptive volume, minimum effective volume, and maximum recoverable volume, these are all crucially important. But I think that these are factors that are taken into consideration after you establish a movement using the criteria of the 3 things that I laid out right here. So let's go into a couple examples of some movements and the kind of thought process that I have. If you want to grow your chest, I think you should have, of course, a bench variation. It does not need to be the flat barbell bench. But here's one point I want to make about the flat barbell bench. It's an incredibly stable chest press. It's a time-tested chest press. The barbell bench has a stronger connection and lineage, in my opinion, to bodybuilding than it does to powerlifting. I think if you want a bigger chest, a bench press variation should be present. Dumbbell pressing, machine pressing, incline bench pressing, close grip bench pressing. There are so many options that are available to you. It's not so much the exercise that's the most important thing. It's whether or not you're fulfilling the role of that exercise. And many exercises fulfill that role. Do you have a chest press variation in your program? If not, you should get one. 2 other exercises that I think can be put close to one another. One, you could argue that one's better than the other, but I think that they have pros and cons for each person, and that's dips and push-ups. I think these are 2 great movements. It's really up to you of whether or not you want to commit to them, but they are just as time tested. They have a lot. The biggest benefit to them is the fact that you can get a lot more volume that's, easier on your joints, because it's usually just your body weight that you can then scale over time. And of course, you can modify it using things like deficits, weighted backpacks, and adding load over time. And it's just a very natural movement. And then finally, a fly variation. I think if you want to maximize the size of your chest, you should have some type of variation of fly. Right now, I'm doing dumbbell flies and I love them. So you should have something fulfilling each of these roles in your program if you do want it to be as big as it possibly can be. If chest is not a priority to you, then congratulations, or it's okay, I should say, that you don't have to put these things in. if something is not of the utmost priority to you, then it's okay to kind of limit the amount of exercise that you do on top of this. For example, and it also depends on the goal, like I said. Since this is a hypertrophy video, I'm not going to really touch on that. But let's have, as a quick aside, for my strength bros out there, do you need to be doing flies for your strength? Hell no, you really don't. Just get bigger based on your presses because it's going to be more specific to you. But if size is the goal, you are shooting yourself in the foot by stopping yourself from doing flies. Can you get a big chest without them? Yes. Are you going to get the biggest chest that you could possibly get without them? I would argue no. Then for the back, a horizontal pull, a vertical pull, and then a targeted isolation movement for whichever portion of the back you want to focus on. Here's the thing. You can get great results, or I would say good results, simply doing only horizontal pulls, only doing vertical pulls. And I would probably not say that you're going to get your best results just from an isolation movement. But why would you limit yourself if your goal is a bigger back? If your goal is a bigger back, you can limit yourself by the techniques that you use. If I only do horizontal pulls, my back will only be as big as it can get from horizontal pulls. If I add vertical pulls to that equation, my back will get better. My back will get bigger. Now, here's the thing. The reason why I said a horizontal pull and a vertical pull is because so many different things can fulfill these two slots. The important thing here is not the exercise. It's the role that the exercises will fit into. When it comes to horizontal pulls, I don't care if it's a barbell row, a T-bar row, a chest-supported row, a dumbbell row, cable-seated row, doesn't matter at all. Is that role present in your program? And do you fulfill that role with a good exercise? If the answer is yes, you can be confident in your exercise selection and the efficacy of your program. If you just say no, then I would argue that you are leaving gains out on the table. Next is vertical pulls. Lat pull downs and pull-ups being the two biggest examples. There's a wide variety of different types of lat pull downs due to the type of attachments you can use. Wide variety of different kinds of pull-ups you can use depending on the grip, fat grips, or any other implement that you can use to add onto that movement. And are any of them more necessary than the other or better than the other? I would argue no. Like I said, the role is what's important. The actual exercise you put into it, not nearly as much. But the fact that it's there, the fact that something fulfills that role, checks that box, that's what's going to get you big. And then finally, on top of that, as a way to kind of maximize your results, you add in your target isolation movements. I think the pullover is one of the best movements to accomplish this. Shrugs are another great example. And if you want to get your lower back, your tree trunk back, or Christmas tree back, you want to have your back extensions in there as well. So that way you can do all that. So when it comes to your chest and back, these are the roles that need to be fulfilled in your program. And then you go from there. Next is shoulders and arms. First and foremost, lateral raises or upright rows. I think when it comes to shoulders, there's just not many options in comparison to, let's say, other muscles like your chest, like your back. Like I can name off a lot more chest exercises than I can shoulder exercises, because at the end of the day, you will need to do some type of lateral raise. Whether you do that with dumbbells, cables, doesn't really matter. You just need to get that movement in there. And I think upright rows are another movement that fit that bill very, very well. Upright rows are not a dangerous movement. A dangerous movement is something that you just load inappropriately and don't build yourself up to over time. Upright rows are not inherently dangerous, except in some cases, but if you are responsible, you modify your grip, you modify your range of motion even, then it can be a very good movement. Unnecessarily banishing a movement from your program is only going to hurt you in the long run, because you start limiting yourself to something that you might not like, might not progress on, or you just become stagnant and then you have nowhere else to go because you've decided in your own head to block off things or put things in a graveyard they don't belong in. Next is vertical pressing. I saw a post pretty recently that saying that the overhead press is horrible for shoulder development, and I agree with certain points, but I don't necessarily agree with the conclusion. So a lot of the premises that they brought up to their argument as to why the overhead press is bad is that most people can't get into a certain range of motion to it. A lot of people can't bring the bar all the way down. Some people are not built for the movement, and all of those things can be true. While I can recognize them to be true, but I can still disagree with the conclusion that they draw. Vertical pressing, the overhead press, whether with dumbbells, barbells, seated, standing, doesn't really matter, is a very effective way to train the shoulders. They are the movement that is going to be the most taxed. They are the movement that are going to actually, like when you actually go to failure, those are the ones that are going to fail. And as a result, they are really potent exercises for that purpose. Now, when it comes to the idea that they can't get the full range of motion, one thing that I think is important to recognize is that a full range of motion is dependent on the lifter, the exercise, and the implement. Full range of motion is not a static, objective thing. The full range of motion for one lifter could be different from another, because for one lifter, going below a certain point could be painful, or going above a certain point could be injurious to another lifter. So you make those modifications for yourself. For example, I do not go all the way down on my shoulder presses. I don't bring the bar to my chest or my clavicle. Once it clears my chin, that's it. That's enough. I'm good. And I find that to be a much easier position for most people to hold than to bring it all the way down, which I think is a very responsible thing to do, in my opinion. Let me know in the comment section if I'm wrong, if I'm just being a dumbass, which is fine. If I'm wrong, I would much rather know that I'm wrong and like learn from that mistake. And then of course, rear delts. You need to isolate your rear delts. Rear delts are going to be lacking for most people. So anything that you can fit into that role is going to be good. Whether it be face pulls, whether it be dumbbell reverse flies, cable reverse flies, skiers, Powell raises, where you're lying on your side on a bench and then bringing it out that way. These are all great exercises, but make sure that slot is filled. Make sure that box is checked off in your program if that is a priority for you. I would argue, even if it's regardless, that rear delt should be present in your program, but your rowing and pulling, they do have a fair amount of involvement from the rear delts. But like I said, when rear delts are a goal or a priority, isolating them is going to be of the utmost importance. Commit to your goal of trying to isolate the movements you want to grow. Finally, we got biceps, everyone's favorite show muscle. This is where, looking at the function of the muscle, looking at the different angles we can put the muscle, that I think really comes into play here. So you have your basic curls, whether they be with dumbbells, barbells, easy bars, doesn't really matter. If you don't like curling on a barbell, you don't need to curl on a barbell. If you prefer doing dumbbells, that's fine also. And then incline curls, I just like this for keeping the arm a bit behind you, or you can even do, I think it's called a Bayesian curl, where you have a cable stack and going that way. Some people really like that movement. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but that's just me. And then preacher curls, where your arms are out in front of you. These can be done on a cable. These can be done with barbells or with dumbbells, on an incline bench even, where you're just doing one arm at a time. There are a bunch of different and great options for the biceps. Isolating them is just going to be the most important thing if you actually want them to grow. Then when it comes to triceps, I personally like push downs, skull crushers, overhead extensions, and the close grip bench. Now, triceps, I tend to bias most of my direct tricep work to the long head of the tricep, because the triceps are involved pretty heavily in the bench press and the overhead press, and all of my benching is done with a close grip or closer grip. So my triceps, for me, are not a point that I'm too concerned about. So when I do direct tricep work, I tend to focus it on that long head. If triceps is of the utmost importance to you, you should still isolate and give more volume, more targeted volume that is not just done through your pressing. So your push downs, your skull crushers, those should be present in your program if triceps is a priority for you. Next, let's move on to the legs, quads, and hamstrings. First and foremost, I'm going to recommend a leg press machine or a hack squat machine. Squatting, the function of squatting, the movement of squatting, the barbell lift, the skill of squatting is an incredibly hard skill to master. It takes quite a long time to just get used to it. Your leverages can change, your ability can change. A lot of things can change as a result of your squat that make it a movement that is very difficult to master long term. So when it comes to building your legs, I think the squat is a very potent exercise to do so. And if you are going to barbell squat, I would recommend doing it with a high bar, maybe doing a closer stance, maybe front squats, an SSB, or maybe doing like with heels elevated, like a heel elevated goblet squat even would be a great exercise. But I would put it toward the bottom, simply because when it comes to hypertrophy, and this is strictly for hypertrophy, if you have access to good leg pressing machines and you feel a better connection to them, you have no reason to remove that from your program just because someone tells you you need to squat. So if you have access to good machines that you feel are hitting your targets sufficiently and your target muscle sufficiently, and you are progressing, you're good, you're fine. Don't freak out. You don't need to squat if you don't want to, and it frees up some recovery for other things in your program. So there are things that you can do, right? But first place, leg press, hack squat machine, and leg extensions. I think leg extensions are a really easy way to get really good quad volume. You can do multiple sets of them. They are incredibly stimulative. I mean, if you do take your leg extensions to failure, you progress on them and get them like strong, I promise you, right when you walk out of that machine, you are already feeling the results of that. So I think they are a great exercise. And as far as the concern about knee pain, knee injury, like I said, are you starting light enough? Are you being consistent with your form? Are you taking things slow? Are you controlling the movement? Are you just being a jackass with the movement? These are things that we can take into consideration much sooner than we can just say, oh, leg extensions, bad exercise, never do them. So, think your way through your exercises. For hamstrings and glutes, Romanian deadlifts, stiff leg deadlifts. Conventional can go on here, but it is a highly taxing movement, and in conjunction with other things, it may vary in its necessity for your program. And for hypertrophy, I think Romanian deads and stiff leg deadlifts are fine. Then hamstring curls, I think if you have a goal to have bigger hamstrings, there's no reason not to include them. And then you can supplement this with more hingy hinges by doing things like back extensions and good mornings. So now that we've kind of done a basic overview of some exercises and the basic roles I want you to fill in your program, let's talk about some considerations or some mental stuff, right? First and foremost, you do not need every exercise under the sun in your program. Remember, think about your program as filling a slot versus stuffing exercise into your program. Most exercises are more alike than they are different. So let's say you compare a inclined barbell bench, an inclined dumbbell bench, a flat barbell bench press, a flat dumbbell bench press. In some situations, it might make sense to do one or the other. And here's the thing, your program is not, at least not always, going to be a super static thing that you need to keep the same for the rest of your life. You can run a certain amount of time, like let's say 3-4 months, with the same movement before you swap it out. Because here's the thing, like I said, it's about filling a slot. It's about fulfilling a role. The role will never change, but the exercises that are used to fulfill it can, and that's fine. Because you don't need to do every exercise all at once, and you can swap things out. If a movement becomes stale, understand that it's not the principle of the movement, it's not the spirit of the movement, it's not the role that that movement fulfills that's stale, it's just the thing that fulfills it. It's like changing out batteries. Or if a battery stops working, does that mean that that device is just completely done for? No. You swap out the battery and it's good to go again. Same thing works with your exercises to keep your progress going forward. Just put a new battery in there, you're good. Next, the amount of work you do to isolate a muscle or train that muscle hard can change based on your goals. If you are more arm focused for a certain amount of time, if you are more leg focused for a certain amount of time, these are things that you can take in and out and put in more. So there's everything like that. So your big three can be something that you keep into your program, let's say for an entire certain block of time, because that's what you need to grow. Or it's just a cycle of exercise that you go through to promote growth. It just depends on the time frame, your current goals, your current wants and needs. What you should do depends on your goals and you yourself, the lifter. Factor yourself into your own equation of what you should or shouldn't do. It's not a static thing. You are not going to get brownie points by obeying what someone else says is what you should do all the time. What you should do depends on your goal. It's relevant to you and your goals. So like I said, factor yourself into them. I hope this video has been useful to you. Like I said, rather than thinking to yourself, this exercise versus this exercise, those exercises are likely very useful to be done together or even at different points in time along your training career, training life, training whatever. So don't think of them as things you put against each other. Think of them as tools you keep in your toolbox and bring them out when necessary and when needed. So like I said, don't rely on one exercise. Have at least 3 ready available at hand. If you are training mainly for strength, have at least 1. But if your goal is hypertrophy, more is not going to hurt you and might actually be better. But like I said, you don't need to have them all the time, every time, and never need and just do everything all at once. You can space things out, swap things out, change things as you grow, as you change, as your goals change, and as life continues to go on. So, like I said, hope this video has been useful. If you like the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. My name is Carl the King, StanceTraining.com. If you would like to work with me for coaching to give you this objective feedback on your own exercise selection choices, then the links to get in contact with me are in the description below. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.